How Robert Stephenson became wealthy, the untold story behind his success. What do you get when you mix coal dust, quicksand, tropical fevers, and a man who refused a knighthood but built bridges that made queens gasp? You get Robert Stephenson, the Victorian engineer who didn't just build railways, he rewrote the blueprint of modern civilization. How did a boy born in a soot-stained cottage become the mastermind behind the rocket, the tunnel that nearly swallowed Britain, and the iron bridge that dared the sea? Why did he risk his life in Colombia, battle engineering titans like Brunel, and end his days in quiet loneliness despite roaring engines and global fame? What secrets did he carry? What regrets haunted him? And what made Queen Victoria pause in awe? This isn't just history. It's a cinematic saga of ambition, heartbreak, rivalry, and triumph. From the belly of industry to the halls of Westminster Abbey, Robert Stephenson's life is a steam-powered thriller you won't want to miss. October 16, 1803. Place, Willington Quay, Northumberland, England. Robert Stephenson didn't enter the world with a silver spoon. He came in with soot in his lungs and gears in his cradle. His birthplace was a gritty port town where coal barges groaned and iron clanked like a symphony of industry. His father, George Stephenson, was no gentleman engineer. He was a brakesman, a colliery worker who operated the winding engine that hauled coal up from the pits. But George had a secret weapon: curiosity. He taught himself to read, studied mechanics by candlelight, and moonlighted as a clock fixer and cobbler, turning broken timepieces and worn boots into functioning marvels. His mother, Frances Henderson, was 12 years George's senior and worked as a servant in the house where George lodged. Their romance was forged not in ballrooms but in coal sheds. It was less Pride and Prejudice and more grease and grit. They married and moved into a cramped upper room of a cottage, where the scent of leather, oil, and ambition hung thick in the air. In 1806, when Robert was just 3, Frances died of consumption, tuberculosis, a cruel disease that swept through industrial towns like a ghost in the smog. George, now a widower, packed up his dreams and his toddler and moved to Dial Cottage in Killingworth, where he took a job as a brakesman at Westmore Pit. Dial Cottage was no palace, but it became a temple of invention. George, determined to give Robert the education he never had, sent him to a village school in Long Benton and later to Percy Street Academy in Newcastle. There, Robert devoured mathematics and science like a starving man at a buffet of brilliance. Evenings were sacred. Father and son would sit by the fire, sketching steam engines and debating thermodynamics over tea and toast. In 1816, they built a sundial together, which still hangs above the cottage door, a symbol of time, legacy, and the ticking clock of destiny. In 1819, Robert became an apprentice to Nicholas Wood, the manager of Killingworth Colliery. It was a gritty job, underground work, surveying, and engineering on a shoestring budget. Too poor to buy a mining compass, Robert built his own. That homemade compass would later help him survey the high-level bridge in Newcastle, proving that genius doesn't need gold, it needs grit. In 1824, Robert accepted a post with the Colombian Mining Association. Why? Partly for adventure, partly for money, and partly to escape the shadow of his increasingly famous father. For 3 years, he battled tropical fevers, navigated political instability, and yes, dodged the occasional llama stampede. It was engineering meets Indiana Jones. On his way back to England, he met Richard Trevithick, the eccentric inventor of the high-pressure steam engine. Their conversations were electric, literally. Trevithick's radical ideas helped Robert refine his vision for locomotive design, blending boldness with precision. Enter the Rainhill Trials of October 1829, a public contest to determine the future of rail transport. Robert, working with George Stephenson and Co., unveiled the rocket. It wasn't just a machine, it was a mechanical phoenix. With its multi-tubular boiler and blast pipe, the rocket hit 30 miles per hour, a speed that made spectators gasp and horses faint. One rival's engine exploded, another broke down. The rocket? It roared past the finish line, proving that locomotives, not stationary engines, were the future. It was the moment steam became unstoppable and Robert Stephenson became a legend. Year 1833 mission. Build the London and Birmingham Railway title earned. Chief engineer Robert Stephenson, now in his prime, was handed the Herculean task of connecting London to Birmingham, a feat that would require slicing through hills, dodging rivers, and oh yes, taming the Kilsby Tunnel. Now, Kilsby was no ordinary tunnel. It was a quicksand-infested nightmare, a geological prank played by Mother Nature herself. As workers began digging, the ground collapsed like a soggy biscuit. Water gushed in, walls caved, panic brewed. Robert's response? Cool as a cucumber in a steam bath. He ordered pumps to remove over 2 million gallons of water, then reinforced the tunnel with 1,250,000 bricks, each laid with surgical precision. He even built ventilation shafts 132 feet deep, which doubled as architectural marvels and emergency escape routes. Casual? For Stephenson, yes. For everyone else, it was engineering wizardry. Year, 1846 challenge, span the Menai Strait in Wales. Solution, the Britannia Bridge. The Menai Strait was a tempestuous beast. Strong currents, deep waters, and the ever-looming threat of collapse made it a graveyard for bold ideas. But Robert wasn't just bold, he was borderline audacious. His answer? A tubular iron bridge supported by massive stone towers. Picture a giant rectangular iron box, suspended like a steel spine across the sea. It was bizarre. It was brilliant. It was bulletproof. Literally, the design could withstand cannon fire. Queen Victoria herself was so impressed she reportedly gasped in a very royal way upon seeing it. Even Isambard Kingdom Brunel, Robert's friendly rival, muttered, "If your bridge succeeds, then mine have all been magnificent failures." Spoiler, it succeeded, and it still stands today, albeit modified after a fire in 1970. Despite his towering achievements, Robert remained modest to a fault. When offered a British knighthood, he declined, just as his father had. Why? Because the Stephensons believed that honor should be earned in iron and sweat, not silk and ceremony. Yet foreign nations couldn't resist decorating him like a Christmas tree. Knight of the Order of Leopold, Belgium. Knight of the Legion of Honor, France. Knight Grand Cross of the Order of St. Olaf, Norway. In 1849, he was elected Fellow of the Royal Society, and from 1855 to 1857, he served as president of the Institution of Civil Engineers, a role he filled with quiet dignity and relentless innovation. Enter Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the flamboyant engineering genius with a top hat and a taste for drama. Brunel championed broad-gauge railways, wider tracks that allowed for smoother rides. Stephenson, ever the pragmatist, backed standard gauge, narrower, cheaper, and more efficient. Their rivalry was cordial but fierce, like two chess masters locked in a decades-long match. Parliament eventually sided with Stephenson, and standard gauge became the national norm, shaping British railways for centuries. In 1842, Robert's beloved wife, Frances Sanderson, died suddenly. They had no children, and Robert never remarried. His letters to friends reveal a man haunted by silence, despite the roar of his engines. One quote stands out like a whisper in a thunderstorm. "The engines I build roar with life, yet my home is silent." He poured his soul into his work, but the hearth remained cold. His grief was quiet, his solitude profound. On October 12, 1859, Robert Stephenson died of liver failure, just shy of his 56th birthday. His death was a national event. Engineers, politicians, and royalty mourned the loss of a man who had reshaped the land. He was buried in Westminster Abbey, near the tombs of Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin, a resting place reserved for Britain's greatest minds. A stained glass window in the Abbey's north choir aisle depicts the Britannia Bridge, standing proud over the straits, a monument to his genius. Robert Stephenson's name is etched into the iron bones of Britain. His bridges still stand, his locomotives still inspire. His life was a symphony of steam, science, and stubborn brilliance. He wasn't just a train guy. He was the man who made the world move. Before you go, if you enjoyed this steam-powered saga of ambition, rivalry, and brilliance, don't forget to follow us, subscribe to the channel, and click that notification bell, so you never miss a moment when we drop another jaw-dropping story from